you that way. But that is all I have. And Susan, did you hit the record already? Oh, there you go. Awesome. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Susan.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Susan Wu, a consultant from the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium, and also representing the Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortia. We are thrilled to be joined for day 2 of our assessment for supporting learning at home series. We are joined by one of the most outspoken dynamic leaders in educational assessment, Rick Wormeli, for differentiated instruction, principles, and practicalities. One of my favorite quotes for differentiation comes from Carol Ann Tomlinson. Differentiated instruction is a teaching philosophy based on the premise that teachers should adapt the instruction to student differences. Rather than marching students through the curriculum lockstep, teachers should modify their instruction to meet students' varying readiness levels, learning preferences, and interests. Therefore, teachers proactively plan a variety of ways to get it and express their learning. So this means teaching where the students are at, not just the starting point of the curriculum. So today we are also going to do Q&A interdispersed throughout the session instead of waiting at the very end. So I'm going to introduce Rick now. Rick is an experienced classroom and building educator who writes professional articles and educational books while training teachers, principals, superintendents, business organizations, school boards, and parents in North America and globally, and all right now from the comfort of his home office. Rick's work reflects expertise in up-to-date pedagogy in so many areas, most notably in assessment, feedback, and grading, but today he is focusing on differentiated instruction. So welcome, Rick Wormeli.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my slides and make sure they're there and that we can all see them adequately. Looks good, Susan? Yes, I got the nod. That's great. For those of you who aren't aware, Susan is going to join me a little bit later and share some practical tips from programs that she has done before when we get to scaffolding. But my bona fides, as I come forward here, I started doing what I'm about to share with you in 1980-81. We were student teaching and then moving into becoming a full teacher with a classroom of my own, and discovered that we had about 47 different nations in our school. Truly, there were about 150 different languages in the school division, and I would send things home in 17 different languages. And we had free and reduced lunch, very impoverished children, all the way through quite affluent children, and we had an unusually high transiency rate. So more than half the kids came in or left during the course of the year, and we were held accountable for teaching them everything, regardless of where they came from, what their language was, any learning disabilities, any cultural differences, didn't matter. We had to teach them all the same stuff. It was crazy nutso. So at that point, I realized I have a really large differentiation repertoire. Oh yes, there were 2 ways to differentiate. Say it louder and slower. And that was the end of my vast versatility. There was nothing more. Well, of course, we have to do more. How do I simultaneously, concurrently, teach a variety of readiness levels all within one class period, or in the course of a week, perhaps, if I'm doing remote instruction? It's like crazy. If I just had 5 or 6 students, well, maybe I could do it. But when I'm in the classroom, my student load is as high as about 185, sometimes it's a little lower than that, and I'm overwhelmed. The Coalition of Essential Schools, it's Ted Sizer's group from long ago, they came out with research a while ago, but I think it still holds up, that no secondary teacher should have more than about 50 or 60 students in an entire school year. Otherwise, you have significantly diminishing returns, effectiveness, and it's even smaller for primary elementary grades. So what are we going to do if the current system doesn't allow us to live up to the promise of all we know to be effective? Well, we're going to have to do the best we can. And I'm going to suggest that you do what I'm about to share with you 51% of the time or more. That's the majority of the time. You cannot physically do with a massive curriculum all that I'm going to suggest. But you can be like an educational asymptote. You can kind of really curve in and get as close as possible to that goal. It can be aspirational. We will approximate total effectiveness, but we may not ever achieve it completely with every single child. This is actually just a function of the system. If we knew way back in the day how the brain best learns, we probably would not have set up schools the way we have right now, kind of a conveyor belt by age. Your grade 2, you learn this. Grade 3, you learn that. It kind of goes against everything we've learned. So what are we going to do to mitigate those negative elements and really live up to what we know to be effective? Well, let's get into that, considering when most people read a book on differentiated instruction, they just realize this is just good teaching. It's just teaching effectively. Yes, we're done. Thank you all for attending the webinar. We'll see you next week for the 3rd webinar. Bye-bye. Wait. Okay, we'll do a couple more things. Truly, that's what it is. It's how do I maximize a learning over that which otherwise could have been achieved with a one-size-fits-all program? Am I going to be vigilant, attentive to that during the course of every interaction? Yeah, but big question. All right, how do I possibly deal with teaching everybody this exact same standards, yet really varying my instruction all the way throughout? This is like an impossible thing. How do I do that? Well, you can't. So, sort of, well, yeah. What? Yes. So I'm going to suggest, and I'm losing my thing here. I'm going to suggest that the way schools are set up currently right now, it really doesn't lend itself to effective instruction. So we're going to have to live up to a school's promise that we teach everyone, not just the easy ones, by parting ways with the school's procedures from time to time in order to live up to that goal. So most classrooms, they are set up to meet the needs of a child who gets it first, finds the classroom friendly, easy. So the child who needs more, less, different, school tends to conspire against that. So do we just teach the easiest, or do we teach all of them? Well, I hope that you would teach all of them. So a leftover photo from the last session, if you recall, this uncomfortable truth. Most of us walk into our buildings every day and negotiate with ourselves for what level of hypocrisy we will tolerate this day. Well, most of us go into remote learning platforms with that same thing. So what can we do to approximate as much as we can and not succumb to hypocrisy throughout our journey? What? What's this red alert stuff? Woo, woo. Uh-oh. Yeah, we're about to get candid. Yeah, I'll call it this slight or gentle insubordination. Again, we'll have to part ways sometimes to live up to the promise. Well, what do you really mean, Rick? Well, the first one is you were hired, I was hired to teach so that students learn, not to play gotcha. That means I teach the way they best learn, not the way I learn or their classmates learn. It also means that I don't blame the child when he fails to thrive. I'm the one that's trained in cognitive science, the developmental nature of children of this age, how to differentiate when the original lesson plan wasn't working. But I'm the one that does that. So I might teach something that's out of my comfort zone. I may not know how to write a poem or recite a poem, but I assign poetry in classes not normally associated with poetry, because to create something that is poetic with content, yeah, the kids can learn it and take it really far. So it's about their success, not about mine. Mine will come with theirs. And when learning doesn't happen, I analyze. I become a reflective practitioner. What decisions did I make, and what was the impact on student learning? That's one of the signs of a true professional. So it means that I might need to part ways with protocols from time to time in order to live up to what we know we want to do. Everybody learns. So to do that, I need to have a big repertoire. I need to have a lot of tools. Otherwise, we fall into that. If all I have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I need instructional versatility. What we found is a lot of teachers who don't study 12, 13, 20 different ways to teach the exact same thing, they tend to get really narrow-minded. They're very focused. They get a little bit complacent. And it becomes so much easier to blame the child when he doesn't get it, after the second explanation, rather than going, oh, wait a minute, I have to have dexterity and agility in my instructional design. It also means that we have to pay attention to our own creativity, our own intellect, and we develop those just for their own sake. How do we pay attention to our own intellect? For example, here in my school division, we actually have a committee dedicated to cultivating teacher intellectual life. I was a chairman of that committee for a short while, and I've continued to help from time to time. We would do things like go to a local museum and say, you know, these courses you're inviting people to pay and attend, could we make them free for teachers? And then we tell teachers, hey, if you go take a class that is completely unrelated to what you teach, you're doing it just to feed your soul, your intellect, to one, be a student again, to experience curiosity and the joy that comes from discovery and really get involved, it will make you a better teacher in the classroom. It develops, yes, a bit of empathy, but you start making connections between things. That's just one example. I did a whole article on that, Cultivating Intellect. It's available on the article section of the website if you'd like. But I might also look at like the master schedule design and realize, you know what, I don't have enough minutes here. So how could I change the master schedule so I have more minutes for this particular thing? Or the requisition process says you need 3 weeks or 5 weeks to get that one supply. I found a way to get it in 2 days. Yeah, it's a little weird, but you break the rules a little bit from time to time, because I'm going to tell you right now, you cannot physically do your job, meeting the needs of all the kids that come before you, by limiting yourself to the school's normal procedures. This might be a very uncomfortable realization, but I think there's room for a slight insubordination of sorts, where you might ask for forgiveness, not permission, as you move forward through these things, not jeopardizing the school curriculum or children, but nonetheless, not limiting yourself to the standard way of doing things. It's kind of what I'm promoting here. You might remember this slide from last time, so I'll only give it a short reminder. Remember, we made the case that kids are like popcorn, they pop at different rates. And so the ones that pop later aren't less legitimate versions of full-fledged popcorn. They get full rights and privileges granted thereof, which means if I teach you and you learn in a different way, which includes a different timeline, maybe you needed a lot of support at first, and then I slowly pulled this support away. That's still legitimate. Whatever you learn, if you learn to that A or 4.0 or 100% level, it is legitimately earned or granted to you. It's recorded because grades aren't earned, but you can say, yes, by golly, I am proficient in that thing. Just because it took a different route doesn't diminish its value. But I'm going to be mindful that time is not immutable. I'm not going to hide behind time. So you might remember we gave a little bit of this quote last time, but the idea that nobody knows ahead of time how long it takes anyone to learn anything. But the follow-up is schools are predicated on that notion as if we did know that. So how long does it take for a child to really master why the bean sprout grows in a wet paper towel in a plastic cup? How long does it take for somebody to learn how to write a compare and contrast essay? You really don't know. We think we know, and that's a weird thing. Humans like a schematic. We like an orderly, linear sequence, but it turns out learning is disorderly. Oh yes, we can try to roughly say this is a prerequisite from this, but often learning is episodic and multi-layered. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but ever making progress. I have sat with people who said, how can I possibly teach algebra? They don't know their multiplication facts. And I pull out the grade 1, grade 2 math program, algebraic concepts. They don't know their multiplication facts, but they can understand advanced concepts. So I may not need to have every tiny little minutia, little subset inside the whole. I might realize this is a skill in isolation. They don't get it now, but in 3 or 4 weeks, they will when we have meaningful context. And I can write a note to myself, spiral back and revisit. So I'm going to look at the larger picture and not be caught up in step 1, 2, 3, 4, like a march through the entire school year. We are so much more versatile than that, and we understand how the brain learns better than that. So you don't have this particular slide or the next 2 after it, so you have to look at the screen right now, not your handout. This is a picture of my son going into grade 8. This is a tour of national parks. I highly recommend Go visit parks with your family as much as they are open and available to you, if at all, in your particular region. This is where they filmed Canyonlands, or filmed, well, it's in Canyonlands. It's where they filmed 127 hours, the Aaron Ralston story, where he had to cut off his arm to extricate himself from the boulder. Ryan, my son that you see there, very happy, outgoing, quick with a joke, one of the nicest kids, just out for the adventure is great. So this is going to grade 8. The next photo you see is the same human creature 1 year later at the next family vacation. That's right. Before, after. Oops. After. That's Ryan going into grade 9. Oh my, who are you and what have you done with my son? So it qualifies you for Mensa Society of Intellectuals to keep up. But what works with this child will not work with that child. So there's plenty of time when we have students in our class where in September, they're going to be a golden student, they're going to be great. And then they kind of revert, they fall behind, or reverse. Oh, this kid is going to be high maintenance. I don't know what I'm going to do. And in January, you just can't wait to be with them in the classroom. They've really just turned a corner. They're just kind of flourishing. Are you open to that and letting them progress, regress, but walking the journey with them nonetheless, no matter what it is? And just because it's very weird and uncomfortable to show family vacation photos during professional seminars, unfortunately for you, I have 15 children. No, not really. I only have 2. This is my daughter, Lynn. Now, this is Lynn in 10th grade. I have to tell you, she was painfully shy. I mean, I remember report card comments in April. Was there damage to vocal cords at birth? I don't know what her voice sounds like. So Lynn is a bit of an introvert, but she's intensely analytical, really. She graduated from Virginia Tech a number of years ago in Geographical Information Systems, School of Engineering, Mathematics, AP scores, highest GPA in the high school where she graduated. But you may not know that because she's sitting very quietly in her soccer jersey there in the classroom because there's a soccer game that afternoon. This is exactly the photo. It was from a soccer game that we're playing. Would you know that about her? And one of the things we realize is we can't teach blind to the students we serve. So introverts, some of you know Susan Cain's wonderful book, Quiet. Be mindful of that. You might be doing class participation and they speak very rarely, but when they speak, they're all in and what they say is substantive and related. You might have extroverts like me who talk a lot but say very little, or hopefully I'm not like that anymore. But I've got to look at class participation, the assessment, the grades, see what's going on. I'm going to have to differentiate. And you have to differentiate based on what you know about students. So just think about that for a minute. A lot of people think, well, if I just give you different choices on your project, look at me, I'm differentiating. No, you're not. Because I need to say to you, what do you know about students that made you decide those were the options there? Assessment informs instruction. That's paramount to a differentiated class. If you just have small groups, you have different projects, that's not differentiation, unless it is truly based on how could I maximize the learning for this particular child or group of kids over that which could otherwise be achieved. Nobody is asking you to do an individualized education plan of some sort for every single child. I would give up. I would go move into a strange canyon in the Southwest and grow funny stuff in the soil if somebody asked me to do an individualized plan for every child every single day. What we're saying is it's as warranted, as needed. That's differentiated instruction, but it must be based on informed data collection as you do it. So take a look here. Are there biases that creep in? Who's going to be the easiest one to teach? Well, most people look at the people who reflect their own gender or their own culture, or maybe they look like a child they've taught in years past with whom they were very fond. And they go, well, that one's going to be the easiest. Whoa, that's already prejudging, prejudice, bias. Well, which one's going to be the most difficult? Yeah, the one that doesn't look like us, our gender, our culture, or the one who actually has the face that's sort of like somebody who really was high maintenance in the past. We're already prejudging. I'll just tell you right now, the one who's going to be the most difficult here is the one on the right side there, the boy in the blue shirt with the impish grin. He knows something embarrassing is about to happen to the teacher. He just wants to be entertained, so he's not telling anyone about it. Who here is going to be the most creative and the best at solving math problems? And did you really look at South Asian students to answer that, or other cultures with some kind of prejudice? We can't do that. That time is abhorrent. It is long ago. We are constantly attentive. Who are you fully dimensionalized in front of me without me bringing in some kind of inherited narrative of what I think you should be? That's going to be invaluable as you move forward and try to be effective in the classroom. This is what our students will face. This is what most university courses look like, and the world that in which they're going to have to navigate. So let's get them ready for this sort of thing. I just want to suggest that this is a moral enterprise, just like the last session. And I'm thinking, what if we don't say anything? What if we don't speak up if we see systemic racism, systemic classism, sexism of some sort, or a teacher just kind of assuming, pigeonholing a child or a group of children? Well, you know, they're like that. Well, you know, I won't be able to talk to the parents. You are not speaking up about it. That silence is complicitness. And I just wonder what goes unachieved when we are playing it politically safe. The time for candor is now. There's a way to do that with civility, with full respect and honor of the other person who may have been unaware. So, 2 quick questions that really help frame this. And if you'd like to write your responses in the chat box, that would be lovely. And we'll take a look at that real quickly. Here comes the first one. What if we differentiate instruction every single time it was warranted? What kind of student would graduate? So you're thinking of a single word. That student would be described as, take a moment and insert a few in the chat room. Just one word. If you want to do multiple entries, it's fine. Give it a shot.
We are seeing answers: seen and heard, flexible, engaged, adaptive, successful, empowered, prepared, confident, successful, competent.
Wow. Susan and everyone listening, those are wonderful. Those are great positives. Any more?
Fulfilled potential, responsible, one who knows their abilities and potential, engaged.
Absolutely. I would add competent. I don't, maybe that was in there already. I'd say flexible, versatile. These are all great, wonderful things, except there are teachers right there in Alberta. I've worked with them. There are teachers here in the States and in other provinces and around the world who would say they'd be overly dependent on the world differentiating for them. And the world is just not like that. Those would be negatives. In other words, it would be ineffective to do that. So understand what differentiation is. It is truly preparatory. It is highly effective teaching beyond that which could be achieved with a one-size lesson you initially planned. Are you versatile enough to change that and maximize things? So it's a way to improve learning, not just pigeonhole kids. For example, if I have a kid who's completely into ice hockey of some sort, I don't sit there in my lesson plan and go, oh, I can only do analogies and metaphors from hockey. That's all I can do. No, I realize they probably could handle metaphors with fishing, maybe even references to Fortnite, maybe references to some other sport or a hobby or whatever. They're fine. What I do is I pull out that hockey passion when I think I could improve it. I can make it more meaningful, or the kid really is struggling and I got to find a way to help him resonate and really have clarity in what we're doing. That's when I pull out that stuff. So most of the time, most kids can do most parts of our lessons. We're good, but are you attentive to when they cannot? This is the mindset of a differentiated teacher. And then, do you have a tool, versatility, from which you can draw to respond when they don't do that, when they're not thriving, or when I can make it more meaningful, more connective? Let's do the next question here. So Susan, if you'll call these out as well, as people record this in the chat room. What if we never, ever differentiate instruction when it was needed, as it was warranted? We never did it. K-12. What kind of a person would graduate from our system? Go.
Defeated, struggling, disillusioned, limited, someone with has a lot of gaps, They wouldn't graduate, drop out.
Oh, I like that one. Trick question. They probably wouldn't graduate.
Basic, frustrated, untrusting, incapable, alienated.
So if you take those collectively and whatever other ones are in the chat room, we take all those collectively and you say, well, I don't have time to differentiate. Remote instruction doesn't allow me to differentiate. What you're really saying is, I don't have time to teach well. And you're right, you don't. School conspires against teaching. I didn't know if you were aware of that or not. It really does. So what we're doing is we're making sure we do as much of it as we can. We live up to the promise. We can't do it with everything, but we can do it with most things. And that's the most we can ask of you as highly accomplished professional educators. So please don't succumb to some of that cynicism that is out there that says differentiation is a lark. You can't possibly do it. I got to do my one thing, and the students have to just measure up and march to that tune. That's a completely different mindset. And again, this is going to be a filter, a prism through which you see everything. All the little practical techniques, you will see them as they come up, but you have to have the principled fortitude, the strength that comes from being principled in order to pull this off. So some people push back. They don't differentiate at the high school level, so we won't do it here. They don't differentiate in middle school, so we won't do it in elementary. They don't differentiate in university level, so we won't do it here. So all those people are saying, once again, they're going to be miserable later, so make them miserable now, so used to misery all along. They'll not get effective instruction later, so they'll get none of it from me because I have to prepare them. No, remember from last time, I wrote a whole article that counters that argument. The best preparation for what's to come is really learning the stuff. And differentiated instruction is really making sure they learn it, not just presenting it and let the dust settle and you move on, regardless of whether or not they carried it forward. This is a really courageous thing. Then you've got to decide, are you developmentally appropriate? So think about that. If I stopped you cold, let's say we're back in our building, so in the hallway, I'm passing you by, or I send you an email, and I say, could you prove to me your instruction, including assessment, is developmentally appropriate for the age group, for the culture, for the readiness level that you teach, for the nature of the students, their learner profile? What would be your response? You would have to come up with some kind of proof. I know this about these children. So that's how I'm weaving it in to my instruction. It's meant to be more rhetorical right now. We don't have to really engage in it, although we can ask some questions when we get to that in a moment. But would your answer be the same in Yellowknife as it is in Lethbridge, Fort McMurray as it is in Grand Prairie, as it is in Calgary? I wonder if the different regions have their own community culture, and I would have to be not knowledgeable of that. I think you would. And what about the families where the primary language is not French or English? The primary language is Chinese, is German, or Aboriginal Cree, or Arabic, or Dutch. Primary languages there in Alberta. And maybe, what about refugee families? People from different genders or sexual orientations other than your own, and those families experiencing job loss and hunger. What I need to customize, tailor what I'm doing to be responsive. The root of differentiated instruction is responsive teaching. Can you prove to me you're a responsive teacher? I can see in your lesson plans, I can circle where your knowledge about a student is coming to the forefront and affecting instructional design. This is the crux of differentiated instruction. So it begs this question of what is equitable. And one of the things we realize, and it's an uncomfortable, candid realization, is that all young people are infinitely valuable. They really are, and we've got to prove to them they are. Whereas sometimes we just channel inadvertently, well, that's less preferred. And the way we do this sometimes is we say certain examples that we think are normal, but they're our normal. They're not normal to these other communities, these other cultures. And we've got to be open to that. And the fact that if we see anything that limits a child, diminishes a child in any way, we actually remedy that injustice, that ineffectiveness. We're proactive. We don't leave it to another teacher to do that. And in this particular slide that I know violates every PowerPoint etiquette rule in the book, I understand that. Don't send me emails. But one of the things I wanted to get across is this. If you look there kind of in the middle, here's an example of where we're very presumptive and we're not looking at systemic things. We're just blaming the child. Overweight, obesity in children. Yeah, we look at a child and they're eating 2 bags of tortilla chips or having 2 Pop-Tarts or whatever it is. We go, they just don't have willpower. It's the child. If they just made a decision, they would be okay about this. So we blame the individual, but we never look at larger community, society, and the pressures that are on that child from the larger system or the limitations on that. And what that develops is a deficit mindset. This idea that I'm going to put the onus, the burden of your learning and the fault in your lack of thriving all on you. You immature child who's had no training. Yeah, you're responsible for all your success. That can't happen. We're the ones that are trained. So what we do in those situations is we are mindful of the environment, but our decisions, our roles in this, and we're also helping the kid in his or her own decision or their own decisions. That's cool. It's a dynamic where we work together, not you should, you should, you should. So be comfortable analyzing your own decisions and their effect on children. And don't forget to pull the camera lens back and look at the larger picture of what is really going on. There might be some unseen systemic things. So this idea of blaming the kid and the kid's not struggling hard enough, doesn't have grit, or all that growth mindset stuff, I understand why people embrace this, but I'd like to suggest something that might make some of you uncomfortable. I think that can become racist really fast and classist. Blaming impoverished people for their poverty, that sort of thing. This becomes a really big problem. So I wrote an entire article on that. You're welcome to go look at it if this is something of interest to you on, hey, yes, we want kids to develop tenacity. Nobody disagrees with that. But some people are plenty tenacious. They're just looking for the next meal. They don't have time or wherewithal to go get the 500 index cards you required. That's not a lack of respect or lack of caring. It's simply survival. So if you would like to take a look at that article, it's there for you if you're interested. So here's the thing or 4 to kind of bring this to the focus. One is this idea of complacency and difference, and maybe some other teacher will take care of it. They won't. This just exacerbates the problem. So students with any kind of learning challenge will not demonstrate successful learning if you don't do differentiated instruction. That's an operating premise for the rest of our time together. So it means we can't blame the environment. We can't say, well, there's no support at home. They never do homework, so I can't possibly teach them. No, you've got these other ways to do that. And then there's real urgency here. Whole futures are built on daily interactions. So the kids we're serving today will be serving us deli meat tomorrow, serving us in government, fixing the brakes on our car. They need to be competent, compassionate people. So we really do have to get this together and make an effective response. And there are lots of things that we can do. This is the first one. We're going to do this, and in just a few moments, we'll take a break here and do some questions if you have any questions coming up. So get ready with those. Maybe start posting them in chat rooms, in the chat room as you can. Take a look at this puzzle right here and see if you can figure out the next row of numbers. This is one of the first principles of differentiation. I sort of alluded to it earlier. We'll see if you can pick up on that. It's kind of framed right there in the square to the right. But for right now, if you've never seen this before, give it a shot. What is the next row of numbers? I'll give you a moment. When you think you know the first digit of the new row, go ahead and post that in the chat box. And Susan, if you'll just call those out. Just the first digit.
4s.
Yeah, can I tell you right now?
3.
4 is incorrect. That is the most popular response around the world. It is not correct.
We have one
And
person.
yes,
3.
1.
yes, don't think it's just 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It is one of those. I agree.
We have
Take a
one,
further moment, try to get the first and second digit, maybe the third. That'll give you a clue.
most of the answers are ranging between 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here we go. Here come the clues. Ready?
1, 1, 3 as well.
Okay, all right. Well, let's see if it holds up. Ready? What do you see at the very top? 1.
1.
How many of those ones do you see up there? 1, 1. In the first row, there's only 1, 1. Do you see that? Yep. So what does the second row say? 1, 1. Oh, that's interesting. What does the third row say? 2 1s, because the row above it has 2 1s. So now, what is the first digit in the new row at the bottom? For those of you who guessed it, it is 3. What's the second digit? It is 1. Because in the row above, there are 3 1s. And then if you notice, there's 1 3. So the first 4 digits in the next row is 3 1 1 3. And then you continue across. You identify the amount or number of the thing, and then you would name the thing in the row above it. So there's 3 1s, then 1 3, then 1 2, 1 1, 1 3, 1 2, and 2 1s. When I give this to older students, it takes them forever to solve this. When I give it to primary students, they get it faster than older students do, or the adults in their lives, because this is a thinks differently problem. It is not a math problem. Now, if you need a private tutorial, email me. I'll be glad to do that with you later. No worries about that. That's my way of differentiating. But why this slide to start us out? Because I must reiterate, many teachers, their creativity, intellect atrophies when they haven't been feeding that part of them. And I'm going to tell you, you can't get really creative, differentiated classrooms from non-creative teachers. It doesn't work. You have to learn to think and problem solve, think divergently. So literally doing puzzles just for the sake of doing puzzles every day is actually legitimate. Learning a new instrument, learning a new language, taking up an art of some sort is legitimate for you to improve your history teaching, your teaching of coding in computer classes. It doesn't matter what you teach. Teaching PE, you still want to have versatility of the mind. There's the answer there. I assume all of you could figure that out, but if not, let me know. And I highly recommend Michael Machaco's book, Creative Thinkering, not tinkering, but thinkering. So think about this. You've got a problem. I'm sending work home, but I'm not getting it back from the students. So I am adding to what we did the last time we were together, and we're giving you lots more ideas on how to actually get the work, having kids get a fair shake at the learning and a fair chance to actually return evidence of that learning so you can do the teaching, the assessing, and the grading. Lots of ideas here, and I broke them out into multiple slides. Any one of these you can do, but I would suggest this. One of them won't work. Now, before you go, which one is the blooper and misleading? What I mean is one won't work, but probably 5 or 6 or 7 will. So you've got this first slide of possibilities. Then you've got this. There should be something in here that we can try. And maybe sitting down together, there'll be others. But if you don't have that intellect, that creativity you've been cultivating, it becomes a problem, a really big burden, because you'll think there's no way I can do this, so we're just going to give up. And that's that complacency that we can't afford right now. We need it more than ever. So does it mean we're going to do summer school for some kids? It's going to be mandatory as we can arrange. Does it mean we might bring our school literally into the community? It's so far away. Parents are worried about childcare, all of that. So we rent a townhouse or a space in a recreational center or an apartment through something for a temporary time, and we bring teachers there and work with small groups of children or one child at a time, in whatever way was pandemic aligned, with the protections we need. But nonetheless, we bring school there because we couldn't get them to come into the school or to do the extra stuff. Yeah, we try to think outside the box. To pull this off with the operational principle, I'm going to ask you to go back and void maybe a childish notion of fairness that might have been welling up inside you. A lot of times we might say, well, I'm very fair. I divide things up equally. Those are two different things. They're not the same thing. So I'm in kindergarten, two children come up to me and they say, there are 3 cookies, but 2 of us. Could you like split them up so we can have them equally, fairly? And you go, well, yeah, let's do that. How should I do it? We have 3 cookies. So, and one child goes, well, I got new shoes. Oh, sorry. Each of us can have 1 cookie, and you take the third and break it in half. And so we each get a cookie and then we get a half. Yeah, exactly. Oh, look at me. I think I'm teaching fractions. And I go, that would be very fair. Each of you gets 1.5 cookies. I just messed up. I just made a mistake. That's not being fair. That's being equal. Being fair really means giving you what you need. So if I'm thinking, well, if I give that child 20 minutes, I've got to give everybody exactly 20 minutes. No, you don't. It could be a different route. It's whatever's developmentally appropriate. So don't think fair means same, because this will drive you nuts. It does not mean that. Even with standardization protocols, you can have different routes to express the same evidence, and you're still standardized because you're asking them for the same evidence across time. So, as you might remember from the last session, these are slides of people taking a high stakes exam, but they're alternative assessments on what that really means. We can do that as long as we rally around the same evidence. It's still legit. So now I have a really cool high-tech special effect. It took me a long time to figure this out. It involves sight and sound. Ready? Ding! There you go. Green circle. That's the end of my technology savvy. All right. This is the definition for all the practicality about to come. Please give it a read. See if anything begs for a little clarity. You want to ask me about it. I'll give you a moment. All right. Be mindful of what it says in the middle. You're maximizing kids over, learning over that which otherwise could be achieved, but it requires you to do things a lot or a little of the time. And also, we're teaching kids how to handle things that are not differentiated. So if I said, I need you all to take notes for this expository thing we're doing this way, that's not differentiated. Differentiated instruction would be, all right, I need you to try it this way for this activity, but maybe this way of this activity, and this other way of this activity. And then in this activity, I want you to choose the one that works best for you, the way you most operate. And I want you to own that. I'm developing your self-efficacy in all of this stuff. So I might teach you 10 different ways to take notes, 15 different ways to summarize information or to paraphrase, whatever it is I'm teaching. So you develop that versatility, not mandate, you must do it my way or the highway. This is the mindset as we're moving forward. Hope that makes sense and is sitting okay with you, at least initially. If you accept this definition, you're going to like the rest of our time. If you don't like this definition, you're going to struggle a little bit with the rest of our ideas. So if something gives you indigestion a little bit later, come back here and see how it fits inside this larger umbrella of what we're really about as we are responsive in our teaching. You might remember this from the last session, the idea that all the kids are different, but they have the same standard, and then different ways for kids to get those routes. This is the teacher's role. How do we get all the animals, all the students to the same level of proficiency, the same standard, so to speak? This is differentiation, the dynamic. It's I teach, and then I assess where you are, and then I revise what I'm doing in light of that data, and I do something different if I need to tweak from time to time, or I have analyzed it and realized this is appropriate. You're doing fine and move on, but I'm constantly attentive to that. rather than just assuming you have it. Let's just pause right here just for a moment. Susan, are there some questions coming up at all in the chat box?
No, just some comments so far. So if you do have a question, please type it in. Heather writes, ultimately, students can learn to differentiate for themselves and become their own advocates. And so it is
I
when
love that.
we ask students to think divergently, it's really putting them in the position of being a critical thinker and being able to realize how they can tap into that to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, self-advocacy. And that means that we turn control sometimes of the learning over to the student. You know, we can mediate relevance and put parameters in there, but we're ultimately trying to release the learning to the kid, not us be the focus of the learning. That's just wonderful. I really appreciate that, Heather. Anything else?
Okay, yes, Omar is asking, what do you do when a student questions why you allow others to do things differently?
What do you think I might say to that? That's really interesting because it will happen. Do you have a culture where kids are allowed to be different? For example, if you don't feel competent in what's going on, you feel threatened by others' competence. So if you were to ask me a question right now, and I said, gosh, I really don't know about that, I'd be fine with you. I know the research, I know what I'm talking about, I'm very competent in my topic right now. But you and I will maintain a very collaborative, collegial relationship. I'm not threatened by you at all. But if I did not know differentiation and the research and the practical tips, or I was not competent, and you asked me a question, I would not maintain eye contact with you, or if you were in the room with me, I'd mumble my response in hopes you wouldn't realize the depth of my ignorance. So we don't leave competence to chance. We go out of our way to make sure every single kid experiences competence every day, even if it's a bit of a stretch. I've got kids who are quite slow in perceiving things and making connections, and they're just not getting it. I will find something where they're perceived as knowledgeable and expert, even if it's sort of only tangentially related to what we're doing, because not experiencing the competence, you can start a downward spiral from which it'll take weeks to get you back up to the same level of investment you were prior to experiencing incompetence in my class. So when we have kids experiencing competence and sometimes being a beginner, not the absolute expert, that's going to be okay because they know they will be competent at another portion of it. If I do different groups, I will put you in groups from time to time where you're very good at that thing, whatever it is. And I'll make sure that happens. Because imagine going to a job where all day long, all you work on is your weakest areas. More proof you're incompetent, you don't belong, you can't keep up. You would quit that job. You probably wouldn't even be hired for that job. Now imagine a child going into class after class or subject after subject where they know they're behind. They know they're below grade level, can't keep up. And they just don't want you to find out they're faking it and they don't belong. This really weighs on you and it creates allostatic load, that emotional drain on your physiology, depressed immune systems, all kinds of other things. You start making excuses. You develop a learned helplessness. So I go out of my way to make sure all my 4.0, 100% kids fail something once a quarter. Oh, please hold your applause just for a moment.
Okay.
No. What that means is everybody is a beginner and there's a humility with that. And sometimes you will be in the driver's seat and sometimes you'll be a passenger. If we do a lot of that and you make your small groups with semi-permeable membranes, in other words, you might have put a student in one group here and then you realize after looking at data, he really should be this group over here, it's going to go over much better, especially if you teach kids about multiple ways to learn, like multiple intelligences or something like that. You start developing this idea of we're all in it together and we'll all have experience with competence and sometimes we'll be beginners, but it doesn't mean you judge them as less. If students are experiencing competence, they don't think this other child's religion or food or way of learning or speed of learning is considered disrespectful or not worthy of respect. They think it's just different and they see difference as strength, not as something less than, if that makes sense. Susan?
Okay, we have a question from Curtis. Sometimes children choose what they think is easiest rather than what is best for them. So how do we guide them or do we not?
I love that. I have often had like, here are 4 or 5 choices for how I want you to express this or process this, or maybe it's a project. And this child chooses the same thing all the time because it makes him look good. He's very good at manga and anime, graphic novels. He always chooses that. And I will go to him and say, I need you to expand beyond. I am trying to build up all sides of you. I'm not going to let you just only do that stuff. That will get very buff, and the rest of you will be this wet, limp noodle. And you want to become well-rounded. If I have a relationship where they see me as advocate, not adversary playing gotcha, you know, with assessment grades, as we talked about last time, they will go along with the pushiness, the challenge, if there's hope. And remember, if you do redos and retakes and things like that, there's no concern. They give it a shot, they get the tools, they've learned a new gift, a new talent, and if they mess up at first or second or third, they know you've got their back. I have found that if children realize you will not humiliate them, you will not let them humiliate themselves, they will move those mountains for you. So it's relationship there, and your assessment and grading, whether or not it comes across as gotcha, you're documenting how they fall short and expressing it to all the stakeholders, or you come across as advocate, I'm there to support you and engender hope at every turn. Anything else, Susan?
I'm reading a comment here. One of the assumptions I find online teachers often make is that students should be able to advocate for themselves, because how else are teachers supposed to know they need help? Unfortunately, self-advocacy is often very difficult for online students to do because it is intimidating. Teaching those skills and creating a risk-free environment makes it much easier for them to express their needs.
Oh, absolutely. So the idea of teaching assertiveness and self-advocacy, overtly spending time teaching those things. How do I advocate for myself while I'm learning at home? Is something that we literally can sit down and do. It could be a session or three, and it could be some individualized coaching from time to time. We can literally send out some sentence starter stems where this child says, they say this, and they just finish it as a way to express. We start with the template, then we slowly pull that away. That's called scaffolding. And remember Oscar Wilde's reminder, the goal of any teacher is to put himself out of a job. So if I give you this template at first, and then I slowly pull away the template until you fly solo, that's the sequence you want to go through as you move through that. And that is an overt skill set that we should not assume all children have. And it might take multiple years to get there. It might not be the current year, but the hard work you do this year to develop those skills in students will pay off next year when they have your voice running through their head as they advocate for themselves.
Right, and I agree that you have to give them the language, you have to give students the language to advocate for themselves. How do they ask for help? And so giving them those sentence frames or those cues will definitely help support our students online, so they start to recognize, this is how I ask for help.
Absolutely, and remember, they have to have a vision of doing it. So one of the things you can do, and there's so many videos now that are out there now, I just love being a teacher these days with all the technology, where you have students demonstrating that self-advocacy, that assertion. And when they see somebody their own age doing it, or perhaps you invite some of your students you know already have this comfortably developed, and might take them off to one side and say, hey, could you and I and maybe two friends, could we just do a couple of scenarios about 2 to 3 minutes each where we film this assertion back and forth, what a gentle conversation like that would be, and then we were going to show that to classmates. When they have that personalization of vision, they're way more likely to give it a shot when it really comes up in their life. Might be something to consider, and as a way to do service for others and contribute to future generations in the school. Susan, for the sake of time, I'm going to push ahead, but if you can be mindful of the questions as they come up.
We're good.
Let's go ahead and get to some more practicality. So this is the next slide if you're following along in your handout. And I just want to ask, give it a quick read. Do you think it's differentiated instruction properly done or not? Yes or no?
We're seeing a lot of no's.
Any yeses?
Nope.
Well, this must be the accelerated class. Well done.
Still in Alberta, Rick, just to let you know.
Yeah, it is Alberta. Excuse me. I'm standing in the presence of greatness. Truly, truly I am. Well done. It is not. You don't change the amount of problems, the workload. You change the nature of the workload. You change the nature of the task. But wait a minute there. Just wait, look at kind of the middle. Some kids are given numeric computation. Some kids are given word problems. Is that not changing the nature of the task? Not increasing workload or decreasing the quantity and all that, literally just changing it. It seems like it is. Wait a minute. Could I have word problems where it's not too much extraneous information to confuse you? All the numbers you see, you will plug into some math algorithm to try to solve it. It only takes 2 or 3 steps to solve. It's very clear what operations are in play. Could I have word problems, though, where there's a lot of extraneous information, you got to figure out what numbers you need, and it might take 4 or 5 steps, and it's not really clear at first what operations? Yes. So I can have everybody doing word problems, and I change the nature within that. Word problems are not saved for the math elite. Word problems should be done by kids who are struggling with the rote or well understood computation. That's okay. I can have computation where you have to account for a variable or you don't have to account for a variable, but it's roughly the same computations. So we're trying to change the nature and all that stuff. Yet now, looking at the whole here, we have another caveat. There are times when students are at concept attainment. They're playing with fewer problems, fewer facets of something, because they're struggling to come to learn, to know. But then once students get good at that, I need to build automaticity, expediency with it. So is it legit? I have 30 minutes with students. Some students only have 5 math problems, but some have 25. Well, the ones that have 25 have already moved through concept attainment. They're ready to get faster at the thing. The concept attainment people will probably spend 5 or 6 minutes per problem. They're drawing out diagrams. They're manipulating things. They're writing down formulas and plugging in. It takes them longer. They're checking their work, but it's the same 30 minutes. So when we say workload, we mean time and energy needed to complete it. And I'm going to suggest some kids get more work, less work is legitimate in some elements of our curriculum where we need kids to get faster, expedient at the thing. In general, it is not the way to go, but there are exceptions to that if we're looking at our classroom realities. Let's look at a second one. I use a lot of different group structures. I've got partners working, triads, whole group, individual. These 3 are now working with these 2. They're online communities, or if we're in the physical classroom, the physical layout. 4 kids over there working up with a video. These kids over there creating a performing art expression of content. These 5 right here working on homework right here in front of me. Well, is that differentiation? Yes and no. So here's the way to look at that. If I walk into your classroom, let's say we're back in our schools, or I'm just standing there in your living room or your kitchen, wherever you're delivering your lessons, and I see that you've grouped the kids that way, that way, that way, that way, and they're all doing wonderful things, I'm not going to say, what are they learning? I'm not going to say, what are they doing? Because that doesn't help me decide whether or not you're differentiating. What I'm going to say is this: what did you know about those 3 that made you put them in that activity at this particular moment in this sequence, in this learning? That's differentiated instruction. If I just divide you all up into groups, it's called being creative and breaking up routine, but it's not differentiation. Please understand the difference. It's the same myth I tried to bust with, I'm not just giving you 5 different ways to do your art project. That's not differentiation unless those 5 choices were based on responding to things I knew about you. Now we're talking differentiation. Here's another, and the last of this sequence of little examples. I'm going to tell you right now, this is differentiated instruction. It's from Carol Ann Tomlinson's one of her wonderful books. She's a good friend of mine. But look through this and see if you can type in the chat box, what are the elements that really make this a differentiation example? I'll give you a moment. What do you see that speaks to differentiation?
Exit cards that give information about student readiness, activities based on what he learned from students from exit cards, allowing to learn from feedback, having a group of students working at independent or too easy work is not differentiation. What does it take to differentiate your teaching to ensure students are at their instructional level that responds to what is fair for each student, not equal?
I love this. Go ahead and interject. Exit cards, which is the first one that people mentioned here. You may have noticed that. That's a form of assessment. You can have informal and formal assessment. For me, formal assessment, I thought about it before the class started. Now, you can do formal assessment just in the spur of the moment. But I want to do exit cards and also notice observations. So the teacher is observing real time, not waiting to 3 weeks later doing a test and deciding whether or not the kids know it or not and documenting that. That's not what we're talking about. But then some of you also noticed the other elements here. The teacher was so well planned, so prepared that he could go a different direction based on what the exit cards and the observations told him. Now, I happen to know the background of Mr. Blackstone in this particular story. Again, Carol is a friend, and it's very similar to the way I design things. So just walk with me through this. Notice, by the way, he's still integrating and talking about the same content area as well. Just one's a higher level, one's a lower level. So now I'm designing a lesson or a unit of some sort, and let's say it's inertia, whatever this level, the grade level is. I'll go in the lunchroom and I'll say to my lunch colleagues, whether or not they teach the same subject, hey, here's what inertia is. What are like 3 ways I could teach this to my kids from you? And we brainstorm a little bit. I go online and look at other teachers' lesson plans and YouTube videos and TeacherTube and Khan Academy, if those are legit, whatever it is, I look them all up, say, oh, I'm getting ideas. I get well read. I think quietly, reflectively in the shower. A lost art. On the long drive into school or the drive home, I'm thinking about this. I'll come up with 22 different ways to actually teach inertia. I'm not going to use them. It would be redundant. But what I do is I rank them. These are multifaceted, dynamic, more advanced applications. These are more rudimentary, introductory. These are kind of in between, intermediary steps. Now I'm in my class, whether it be remote instruction or back in their physical space in the schools. And I've got a group of students who are really slow at this. They're just not getting it. They're just not there. Well, I can shelve the advanced things I'm going to do with the rest of the class, and I can pull out some of those more rudimentary introductory things I didn't do with the whole class because they didn't need that, but I've got them at my fingertips. Or reverse this. I've got a really advanced group. They are skyrocketing, man. They're ready to move ahead. Rest of the class is not. So I shelve the introductory stuff for them, and I pull out some of those more advanced things. I am so well prepared and planned, I can be impulsive. I can turn on a dime. I am not going to do this disrespectful thing. Ready? This is a chronic default in some teachers' classrooms that we should move away from as we're in our operating. Ready? Hey, you guys finished early. Yeah, go do the puzzles in the back of the room I set up for you. Or remote instruction. Here's another little folder. I'd like you to go to these activities and wait for us to catch up. You can do a silent reading book. Would you go work with a struggling classmate? I have some animal cages I'd like you to clean. Oh my, yeah, these are all spin your wheels in the loose mud until we're there. It's disrespectful. Now, it's a part of civility to help each other once in a while and maybe do a puzzle once in a while, but it shouldn't be your normal go-to. You shouldn't be like, well, tomorrow I'll give you a little folder with your own independent activities because I'm not prepared to respond right here, right now. You've wasted our time together. So I'm going to suggest you go a little bit overboard. And the first time you ever try to differentiate a unit, it does take time. I'll tell you right now, it takes me 2 hours about 3 different times during the week. That's 6 hours or more, maybe a half a day on the weekend as well to actually differentiate a 2 or 3 week unit. It's a lot of time, but year 2, I have a life. I can play sports. I can take my wife out to dinner. I can read for enjoyment, but year 1, no sugarcoating it. Change is a process and that's hard. But once you do it, it gets faster all the other times you go through it. So right here, I'm going to have dexterity because I did planning. I'll put it to you another way. 90% of effective differentiated instruction is what you do before kids walk in your classroom door or sit down to tune in via Zoom or whatever your platform is going to be. It's what you do ahead of time. Teaching is almost anticlimactic. It goes wonderfully well when you've done that preparatory work ahead of time. Now,
we've got a couple of questions here. James is asking, would it be fair to say UDL is anticipating differentiation opportunities and differentiation is responding when needs arise?
Yeah, when UDL started becoming really popular, and I was first reading their books and their printouts, I was stunned by how almost verbatim the sentences were being lifted from what we were saying in differentiated instruction in general. And of course, they've gone on and really elaborated on these lovely things. I think training and universal design for learning is one of the best things you can do to cultivate creative self, divergent thinking, but also to fortify you, to well provision you to be able to do differentiated instruction. So yeah, go man, go when it comes to UDL.
Okay, we also have another question from David from the YouTube live stream. What if a student's strategy doesn't work, but they think it does, adding instead of multiplying, etc.?
Oh yeah. So what are you going to do? That's when you get into the instructional coaching mode, the descriptive feedback mode. And we're going to give you very specific techniques on that in the third session. But that's the moment where you don't want to telegraph the solution, the correct answer, the issue. You want them to do the heavy lifting, analyzing critical errors, and then adjusting or revising in light of their own discovery. So you want to build that in place. Be prepared. If you have not thought about a variety of ways to teach this, that's going to be harder. So if you build up, what are 5 ways they can teach pronouns? What are 5 ways they can teach parallel versus series circuits? Oh, now I've got another place to go. If a student is not self-assessing, they think they have it, but they don't, I'm going to push and say, let's see if you do. Let's prove it to you and to me that you do have it in that coaching mode. So I'll kind of put that off to the next time if we could. Now, in this slide, starting here, if you want to put a star on it, this is the sequence as you go through it. We're not going to have time to do justice to all of it because I want to get Susan in here in a few moments, and I want to tell you about some other practicalities, but I will point out some highlights. Notice there are 3 parts, A, B, and C. You have A right in front of you. If you bounce your eye 1 through 5 through it, you will see there's nothing there that says, yeah, design the learning activities, design your lessons, none of that. This is the preparatory. This is the stuff that allows you to do a brilliant job in the actual lesson sequence. So number 1, read that in just about 10 seconds, and then I have a comment. All right, number 1, that one part, when teachers spend ample time, enough time, and they're really clear-minded, the lesson writes itself. Almost every time a differentiated lesson bombed is because the teacher didn't spend enough time just on that number 1 step. Because if you and I sit down as subject-like colleagues and we say, okay, what's the standard? What's the learner outcome? What's essential? What's kind of supportive of that? Go through that. You start seeing the layers of the lesson. This leads to that. This is connected to that. So I need to bring that in at this point. You get the CUD, know, understand, and do. So these are things they should know. These are the things students should understand. These are the performances or the tasks they should be able to do or execute after this lesson is done. Wow, it's like oxygen. It breathes life into what we do. So I am begging you to get very good at number 1. Now, number 2, we're going to do another slide in just a moment. How do you get to know your kids? Number 3, you're going to design your assessments. Which one do you design first? Formative or summative? Summative. Begin with the end in mind. And where to get those ideas for prompts and questions on the summatives? From number 1. These are the standards, the essential outcomes that you've got. And then you design formatives as little chunks you break off the summative so we can see that progress towards the summative. Then you actually design your pre-assessments you might need to deliver ahead of time. Now remember, in pre-assessments, there are 3 priorities here, 3 things we get out of it. 1 is for the teacher. I find out where the kids are. Yay! A lot of teachers like, I've been teaching fourth grade, grade 4 long enough. I've been teaching grade 5, whatever it is, long. I think I know where they are. And you get a little complacent. But it's not about you totally. The second and third rationale for doing pre-assessment is, one, the kids prime the brain for what's going to be taught. They hem and haw and wrestle on the pre-assessment, mostly writing IDK, 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 IDK for text messaging, I don't know, and all the answers. But when they actually get to that part of the lesson, the brain lights up. Oh, that was on the pre-assessment. That's important. So they see what to lift up as salient. But the third reason that we do it is we need to have that growth perceived. This is the gift principals give teachers and teachers give students. So I need a baseline of where you are right now. Then we go through the lesson, periodically monitoring where you are as you're moving towards your goal. But at the end of it, you take your test, I bring out that baseline pre-assessment, and we compare where you once were to where you are now, and what decisions did you make that allowed you to get to this level of success. So students have a very clear vision of going from 0 to hero in a Disney way, to going from not knowing anything to really being able to accomplish it. Next time we do a unit, they're confronted with all these things they have to learn. They're not overwhelmed. They realize they can climb that mountain. The teacher is sharing the path with them. And then number 5 is a reminder. This is not a pure linear sequence. You're going to go back and forth. Like one of the things we found, yeah, you spend a lot of time on number 1, but way down there where you're designing your formative, summative assessments, you will think more clearly about what is evidentiary of your essential learner outcomes. And you will go back and rewrite them, revising them. You'll be designing a test. Oh, this is a great question. Oh, wait, it's not one of my learner outcomes. Oh, it is now. It's okay. That's a very organic thing. Give yourself that permission. And then in this slide, oops, sorry, my cursor went off. In this slide here, this speaks to step number 2. What do I need to do to get to know my kids so I can be responsive? This is the kind of information I elicit from kids over the first few weeks of school to the greatest degree I can. And I will tell you, we've also got to add in the new realities of COVID challenges, COVID-19. I'm adding them all in, and I have a profile in every single kid. Most electronic stuff with your student management record systems or electronic grade books allow you to maintain this. But if you don't, a simple Excel spreadsheet will allow you to do that. I used to do it on notebooks and note cards. So now I have the technology to make it work. Reminder, I have that article, and it was very popular about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, on how do you get to know your kids. A variety of ways to do that. It's at the article section at the rickwormeli.com website. Feel free to use that, grab anything you want from it, and run with that. With this slide, remember there's 3 parts, A, B, and C. I'm just going to talk about B1. The rest of it you can read. You're professional. You understand those well, I'm sure. But the mindset here is, if I've decided these are standards, learner outcomes, and these are the assessments, what do I need to do? What experiences, what pathways do I need to provide so every one of my kids gets an A every single time? It won't happen. Reality gets in the way, but that's always my goal. What paths will I take? And this is where you start thinking about, I'll show that video, we'll do this online module, they will do this one written part, they'll talk to a partner. That's where you start really brainstorming those, pulling from that earlier brainstorm list we talked about with Mr. Blackstone and inertia, and then you roughly give it a tentative sequence. So that's described here. 4 verbs with 4 correlates. You're going to brainstorm the stuff, then cluster, higher, lower, and then a rough sequence. That should sound familiar. But notice 1, 2, 3, no real differentiation. Now look at 4. These are your correlations. So you're looking at your lesson plan and going, okay, where have I met a need in the learner profile? That's the stuff on this slide. So I've got kids who are really into technology. Am I availing themselves and myself of that? I've got gifted advanced kids. I've got kids with Tourette's or visually impaired or English language learner, whatever it might be. So that's the first correlation. Then where's my expertise coming out? In 7-year-olds, in 17-year-olds. My lesson should express that. That's cognitive science. And then where's my differentiated instruction, my tiering and scaffolding and all that? And then where's my cognitive science, literally how the brain learns, not just the nature of the student of that age. All those things I should be able to circle in the lesson plan and point out to somebody who might ask. Now, last little overview on your lessons. And this is kind of something that's just a pet peeve of mine, but it's really served me well and others. Most teachers stop at sense making. What are the parts of this? What's the definition of that? This is accessing content. That's where they stop, and then they say, okay, now we're ready for a test. But here's the kicker. It's the personal processing where you create meaning making and connection that is the most transformative. Of the two, which one leads to the most long-term memory, the greatest testimony for teacher success and student success? Here's my not so subtle hint. I'm just saying. You want it to be meaning making. So this is recoding in terms of something I already understand. So I'm drawing analogies and metaphors. Or the teacher's now shown me how I can use this content or skill to do this thing I value. That's also meaning making, making connections between stuff. We could talk an entire seminar just on that. So if you want to, there's books just about meaning making. There's articles about this. Look at your lessons. Are you just having kids access knowledge and then giving a test? Or are you moving towards connection and meaning making? Then the last one is just metacognitive. This is just, hey, I'm going to look at the lesson and decide whether or not it's working or not. What would I do differently next time? Give myself advice. That's that metacognitive. What we've given you is the motif, the skeleton. And now every single thing you read on differentiated instruction or responsive teaching from UDL, anything that comes up, and certainly for the rest of our time together, it fits someplace on this skeleton, this armature. So these are the elements of that differentiated instruction responsive teaching. Don't worry, we're coming up to questions in just a moment. So 5 different ways most of the world accepts is differentiated instruction. One is content, what we want kids to learn. Process, the way they learn it. Product, the way they prove their learning. Affect, social, emotional atmosphere. Yeah. And then the physical or learning environment, where you see some examples there. We give them assisted technology. It's a single gender class, small teacher-student ratio, seating arrangements, that sort of thing, preferential seating. So every lesson you do, you could do this. Is there anything here I need to adjust? For example, what if my kids are working with pens and pencils? Would some kids, because of fine motor skills, need a triangular rubberized pencil grip? Well, which one is that? Probably how they learn it so they can keep up with note-taking or drawing or whatever we're doing. And maybe even the emotional, the effect, because they're so frustrated, their hands hurt, they can't keep up, they're giving up. So maybe I've done 2 things there with that pencil grip. 11-7 bajillion ways. That's how many ways there are to differentiate in the galaxy. I am telling you, they'll boil down every one of them to 1 or 2 of these particular elements. So these were the things I wrote in my lesson plan book when I first got into differentiation, of which to be mindful. They were on my radar every single week. Now to support that, we might divide kids up into readiness groups. Notice I didn't say ability. Ability is something very permanent. It is your essence. It feels very threatening. We don't say ability. What we say is, hey, those of you ready for the first few steps in coming to know, you'll start here. Well, notice I didn't say sit here or be in this chat room or this breakout room. You'll just be there, because that suggests it's permanent. It's not just a momentary transition to something else. I will use the exact same language with advanced kids. Hey, those of you ready for the next level of complexity, you'll start here. Even they will transcend their current position. But what if I said this? And by the way, I've heard this from teachers all over North America and around the world. Ready? Those of you with little or no ability, I want you to sit at this table. How crushing is that? Now, I go to one student who I put in an advanced group because I saw something. They were capable of advanced group, and they're falling behind. They're getting mad. They feel embarrassed because they can't keep up. I probably made a mistake. I will go to them and say, I see that you're experiencing frustration. This is beyond where you're comfortable. Let me take you from this advanced group and move you to this medium group over here, or the slower group. What do you think that student is feeling as I walk them across the physical classroom or just move them electronically in groupings online. I'm going to the dummy group. I'm a slow kid. No, I used to think that too. It's usually relief, followed quickly by gratitude. I am moving them from incompetence to competence. This is a good thing. Know that I am there to look out for you, not to play gotcha all the time. So if this is beyond your ken, so to speak, I will work with you on that. And you can have a relationship with me that is so honest, you can come clean if you're feeling like that. So I'm going to tell you, you might want to group kids according to readiness. Are you ready for more complexity or early complexity or somewhere in between? You might group them according to interest. These kids were really interested in this TV show. These kids are interested in that one. They might be able to make connections between this science thing and that TV show. And they would take it to a deeper level. They would resonate with it better. Learning profile is, again, that slide for number 2, all those different categories. The thing I'll suggest to you, think heterogeneity, not homogeneity. I made the mistake when I was into multiple intelligences quite intensely of doing things like grouping all the kids who are intrapersonal, quiet, reflective people. I'd come by, 15 minutes would go by, not a word was spoken. And I'd have to lean in and say, it's not telepathy. You have to talk. So what I decided to do, and then I would get bodily kinesthetic learners, and they'd be like tapping and moving around, ready to go. Where to go? Whoa. Sometimes your great strength can be a deficit if it's too much of a good thing. So what I try to do is I look at the learner profiles and I put kids in groups where their strength will complement another strength. And together they actually pull each other up and move forward in whatever's happening and not get bogged down, rallying only in their little myopic strength area, if that makes sense. So when you look at the learner profile, don't think about grouping just purely like that. Put like 2 or 3 of them together that bring out the best in each other. And then this grouping thing is so important. I gave you some mentoring questions for yourself and for working with others. Here are things to consider. How should I group? Why should I group? And then these are all the ways I've ever found to group kids K-12, even into college level. It's one or more of these, including online communities. You can have breakout rooms in Zoom and a lot of other social media platforms. You can do that. So these are ideas. The one thing I'll suggest to you is that group affiliation should be temporary. Again, that semi-permeable membrane, dynamic, not static. If they're going to be with the same kids all the way through, like forever, it bogs them down. And they don't learn the diversity. They don't learn to work with others. It tends not to end up well. So the idea, you're in this group for this, but you're going to be in this group for that, is actually the better way to go. And then a part of this is that over the course of a week, some kids learn best independently. Some kids learn best working with others, small groups, partners, and some really learn best by the whole group being together, the interaction. But most teachers only teach primarily 1 or 2 of those ways. And I'm gonna suggest we have to kind of be good at all 3. So here's like a global idea, here's small group of partners, and here's more individual stuff that you do. Kids need to experience the same content through all 3 of those areas. So we literally call this is in the literature, in books on differentiation, ebb and flow over the course of time. You don't have to do it every lesson, but maybe over time. You might remember this picture from the previous seminar on grading, just a reminder that you cannot, if you're differentiating, falsely assume something present in the learner outcomes that really isn't there. So the example you remember from last time, if it says the student is able to, as they're reading, it doesn't say, when reading silently on grade level material for the very first time. So if I could give an oral presentation, vocal inflection and tone, the kid could actually do the analysis of the literature, really be fine. And that's my goal at that point. So I'm not going to falsely put something in a standard or learn outcome that isn't there that would prohibit a kid from doing the very thing he could do very well. Now, you might be sitting there from last time or right now going, I don't know all these different ways to assess kids. So I did a little experiment. I wanted to share it with you. You sit down and brainstorm 8 different ways. If you want to say 10 or 12, that's fine. But for purpose of example, I just say 8. What are 8 different ways to assess X, whatever it is? And just practice this to practice the fluency of ideas, the flow of ideas and thinking divergently. So I wrote these out in about 1.5 minutes. I'm a fast typer, but these are 8 about how would I assess pronouns, Bounce your eye through it. Even if you don't teach pronouns, it's okay. Bounce your eye through it. Yeah. They're all getting to different elements of what is evidentiary and proficient and versatile, agile when it comes to pronouns. Wait, then I thought about coding. Now, I don't teach coding, but I used to do, okay, I'll admit this, Fortran, COBOL, and BASIC. Yeah, those are my coding languages of yesteryear. But right now, let's think about this. Again, in about a minute and a half to 2 minutes, I wrote down these. I'm trying to think divergently. Bounce your eye through them. We have to get good at this and not be myopic, but stuck in this cage. Well, I also wanted to give you some ideas, and this took like 3 or 4 minutes, I guess, of generalized questions I love. I had a lot of these. Like one of these is impossible to answer. Tell me which one it is and explain why. For multiple choice, you have to explain in the next question why you chose the one you did and why the other ones don't work, and you can't use process of elimination. Identify 4 metaphors between the science, writing, engineering, art thing, a government thing, and a favorite sport. Lots of just general ones. If you can grab any of these, feel free to use them. But the idea is you get good at, here's the topic, and here are 10 questions. This is a little bit like Edward de Bono's thinking hats. I need 20 questions to which the answer is yellow. Go. I do that just to cultivate one's own creativity. I invite you to do that. That's a part of a differentiated class. So you have lots of examples here. Then a reminder that I can't respond unless I know your story. Are your assessments revelatory? Are you disaggregating enough you can actually see the data so you know what decisions to make in instructional design? Again, this is from last time. And then this idea that we are going to have respectful tasks, which means I'm not going to diminish you. I'm not going to say, go color a picture when I want you to analyze literary elements. I will do something your level. The tier lessons we're about to do, compacting curriculum is where you shorten it down for those kids who already know it and not have them experience mediocrity or just regurgitate the things they already know. Scaffolding, providing support, then pulling it away. And we already talked about organization so you can be flexible. These are some of the great tips you will find in books on differentiation. The idea you might have a personal agenda just for some kids so they feel structured. You might have centers and learning stations. Wait a minute, what would that look like in an online experience? You can have learning stations and centers. I might have different journal prompts. Some kids are responding to this challenge, this prompt, some are responding to that. Orbitals or satellite studies. This kid is Asperger's or maybe just is really not into what we're doing, but this thing over here you could do as an independent study, satellites around what we're doing, still getting to substantive learner outcomes. I can let him do that independent study and then come back and share with the class. These are literally the language that we use, the activities we use in differentiated instruction. And this is just an example of an agenda I've actually used in the past. I just changed the date so it would look like I was really futuristic. But the top half is what they would do in every lesson. The bottom half is anything unique to that day's lesson. It's there for you if you take a look. Some kids really respond well when they have a checkoff list, and I don't have to worry about management or lack of attention, or it helps them remain focused. So now I want to spend enough time with Tiering and Susan Wu. So I'm just going to tell you what's here. This is cognitive science. I am reminding you that if you have a background how the brain best learns, it's quite often you don't need to differentiate. You just need to teach in a developmentally appropriate manner, the way the brain learns. So that neuron, you see the myelin sheath, it needs hydration and certain proteins to really function and carry the sodium potassium ion pump down the length of the axon through the dendrites and across the synapses. So I am telling you, kids should be drinking a lot and eating proteins and complex carbohydrates. I'm reminding you that this is the way a lot of teachers teach. They do clerical things, then they teach, and then they do clean up clerical things. But what does the brain best remember? The front end and the back end. So I front load and back load everything important I'm going to teach. I have the courage of my pedagogical conviction to literally summarize, help kids process whatever it was at the end of our time together, even if we didn't get to the nth degree of curriculum, because it's not what I presented, it's what the kids carry forward. Remember, you're going to have that courage of conviction. And the front end, warm-up activities, early bird, whatever it is, it's going to be related to that day's topic if I'm introducing something new. I'm going to remember that the brain craves structure. So I'm going to provide structure like you see here and here and here, just structure ideas. I'll pause here on this one. This is the blood content. What if I said write a paragraph on blood? It's going to be overwhelming. Type in blood in a search engine. 5 million hits. Mom, which one do I read? How do they? Overwhelming. So I help the kids come up with a way of thinking about it. If you've taught the kids a way to think, they'll never lack for what to write. Writing and thinking, don't make that into duality. 98% of writing is thinking. So if every kid says, I don't know what to write, he's saying, I don't know what to think. So I'll build a week of your thinking. I'll give you one night to write the entire essay. And it's the first time you ever heard of it. Or the paragraph, what do you mean? Well, if we realize there are 4 parts of blood we're studying, 5 attributes, and we set up a matrix like this, check it out now looking at your screen. Every column becomes a paragraph in a multi-paragraph report. So all the child has to do, look at red cells right now on the left, he has to just fill in the little cell. So when I'm reading a book, I'm online at a website, I'm looking at an interview or a TED Talk, whatever it is, I just got to find out red cells, what's the purpose? Okay, carries oxygen and nutrients, 5 million per cc of blood, small rounded dented like little Cheerios, no nucleus in the mature stage, bone marrow and spleen. And then all I have to do for my rough draft is put those little pieces into simple, pretty sentences. Does this look familiar? Yeah. So writing the rough draft is one of the most mindless things we do. It's the thinking we do ahead of time. And then you do a simple draft. I'll give you several days to do what? Introductions, conclusions, transitions, some examples. But the rough draft, easy. So no student in my class over the years has ever done this. Oh my gosh, we have a rough draft due. I haven't even started. They're more like, can we do the rough draft? I'm about to pop. And that's okay. That's good learning. So these are just ideas on the structure and the cognitive science. I'm very aware of time and I want to give more time for questions. So I'm going to move past this one to here. Many of you are very familiar with retrieval practice. We have found that retrieving practice is retrievalpractice.org is a wonderful website. And this is just another example from cognitive science. It turns out when you practice things in blocks, like I'm going to do all division problems, then all multiply problems, then all fractions, you don't remember it nearly as well. Each session of practice is not as effective. But when you mix it up, you interleaven it, so to speak. So I'll do a division problem and then a multiply, and then a fraction, and I come back to division. The actual practice session is far more effective for long-term memory. This is just one of the coolest things. And these are 3 books that talk about this rather practically, very directly. So the one on the left is the shortest. I'll recommend that. The one in the middle just came out at the end of last year. And the one, Make It Stick, came out a few years ago. This is one way to kind of get up to speed and what we're realizing in cognitive science. Now, we're doing this tiering and scaffolding here. And it's going to be our last time, but I wanted to pause real quick. Any quick questions we can do before we launch? And Susan, when we come out of this, I'm just going to turn it over to you for your slides, and then we'll turn it back to me for maybe the last 10 minutes to show a few more practical tips.
Okay, sounds good.
So what questions do you see?
Not any at the moment.
Okay. So let's go ahead and let you have 5, 6 minutes, 7 minutes with your slides, and then send it back over to me.
Okay, sounds good. So thanks, Rick, for giving me this opportunity. Has everyone seen my slides? Okay, we're good. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about instructional scaffolding. So I like this metaphor of an instructional scaffold because basically we're talking about how do we create supports for students that teachers can deliberately add supports for students to enhance their learning and for them to be able to get to the level that they need to be at. And so these scaffolds are temporary and adjustable. And there's a little saying that I like, and it's easier to level up than it is to start at a high level and then to scale it back, because you've already lost most of your students at that point if you're starting at too high of a level. So I always teach with the assumption that none of my students will understand it. So we're trying to build that scaffolding in the design of how we teach. So before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about Norman Webb's depth of knowledge. Oftentimes when we're evaluating students on their knowledge, we are gauging their understanding. But understanding doesn't always mean the same thing for different students. So for example, DOK1 would be knowledge acquisition. So when some students understand, they are just at the recall level. In DOK2, they can actually apply that knowledge. In DOK3, they can analyze information, and in DOK4, or knowledge augmentation, they can think conceptually, which means they can use what they've learned and apply it to different contexts. So I'm just going to model very briefly how that might look for a grade 1 lesson. So these are the general learning outcomes. Describe seasonal change and interpret how the effects of seasonal change on living things. So more specifically, I'm going to talk about identify human preparations for seasonal change and activities that are done on a seasonal basis. So the first thing I might do is I might decide to build their background knowledge. So I'm going to assume that maybe when I talk about seasonal changes, some of my students may be from different countries where it is sunny all year round. And so if I'm trying to talk about seasonal change, I might show this time-lapse video and ask them to record what are the changes that they see happening in this video.
We didn't hear the sound there.
You don't need the sound, it's just to be able to record.
Okay.
Okay, so after showing that video, this is, I'm hoping that students will be able to record what they see in seasonal changes. If you're trying to differentiate online, you can use talk and comment, and what that will do, sorry, I'll have to just adjust my screen here, is that you can make an audio recording. And I don't think you can hear it because I forgot to share my sound, but basically when my students see that ear symbol, they know they could click on the talk and comment, and it would actually read it to them or read the instructions to them. And then thinking about, so that might be, that previous slide was just DOK1. So then I would get them think about differences between summer and winter. I'm trying to connect them to what they understand about summer versus winter and how their families might get ready for that. So here with online learning, I'm going to use Slido, which is an app. So if everyone could pull out their phones and or if you can on your laptop, go to slido.com and go type in the code H114. And you can name what are things that you and your family do to get ready for winter. So you can just enter one word or a short phrase. So this should populate your responses in real time. So as you can see, this is a more interactive way that your students could be involved. And obviously, if you're looking at grade 1, it would be teaching, it would be fairly simple for your parents to get on that in order to help their children respond. This also sets it up so that students can see how other students are answering as well and giving them more divergent ideas. Okay, we'll stop it there to go to the next slide. And then I might do something like an anticipation guide. So again, another way would be the weather gets either warmer or cooler in the fall. There is lots of either rain, sunshine. So this would be like an example of a pre-assessment, and now connecting it to the background knowledge of how their family gets ready. So again, we went from now from application into analysis, into a would you rather question. So in this question, would you rather have all year summer or have all year winter? So we can type those into the chat box. And when you think about this question, think about why. So now all of a sudden you are going into deeper analysis. So for students to be able to answer this, they're going to have to compare and contrast and analyze and use higher level skills in order to answer that one. And then I might do something different. This is for more kinesthetic learners. So I would set this up as a drag and drop for your ELL learners. My visual cards might have visuals on them to help support that. Or Rick suggested you could have students brainstorm their own activities and then sort them in a concept sort. And so these would be examples of different ways that cycle through different ways that you could demonstrate levels of understanding, because some of your students may be ready, their readiness levels will be different. And so this would be leading to the main activity of reading a fiction and a nonfiction book. And again, you're offering different opportunities. So you might include a of yourself reading aloud the book, and then offering a nonfiction version, which I won't play at this point, that you can also watch. So this would be an example of how that differentiation process might look online. And I'll stop sharing at this point and to see if there are any questions for myself or for Rick.
I haven't seen any there, Susan.
Okay.
So I think we can go ahead.
Sure.
There's some good comments there, but if some come on, feel free to interject.
For sure.
Okay, so let me just give you a little example of some of my thinking about this that fits so well with what she was doing. A reminder that we tier in gradations. There's more complex, less complex, and I'm really rallying around the readiness. So are they ready for this scaffolding, as Susan says, or ready for less scaffolding, really to go higher, to launch, to achieve escape velocity from the teacher orbit? I would love that. That would be like so cool as we do that. So readiness, interest, and learning profile is the way most other books and different instruction people talk about tiering. I'm only rallying around the readiness side. So this is what Carol Ann Thomason calls ratcheting. That's why I put that down below. Ratchet it higher, ratchet it lower as you go through it. Now, you saw Susan give you a primary example. I'm now going to give you a secondary example. Number 2, I want you to isolate the variable to one side of the equation sign, plug in for x, get y. Now you have coordinates to plot on a Cartesian plane, a 4-quadrant graph. So I'm trying to tier, scaffold, whatever I need to do for these students. So this is what the student does. You see number 2, this, because it's less than and an equal to, it includes along the line. So it's a solid line, not dashed. So now this is the solution set. This is the answer. Well, how might I tier this? Well, early readiness, I limit the number of variables they have to handle. I might give them an X so that Y doesn't come out to be a fraction, because that freaks kids out, that sort of thing. But for advanced readiness, I'm going to add in variables in multiple facets. Like I might add in absolute value, or down below, the last one, they might have to graph the intersection of 2 inequalities. Well, that's interesting. You got the slide before, the slide after, but Rick, where do you come up with these ideas? Well, just a moment, we'll get to that. When you're managing the class, you have to think about, how do I do all this stuff simultaneously? So at the same time as everyone else. So I'm going to suggest you have a 10 to 45 minute anchor activity where the boat is anchored solidly and you paddle out in dinghies and canoes and rowboats, and you do a mini lesson. So now I have the class working autonomous to me right there in the center. And then this group over here, well, they bombed the vocabulary test. I need to go over that with them and then send it back into the activity. The group down below, well, they need 15 minutes because they're doing an independent activity that's quite advanced. I need to double check, send it back in. The group over to the left blew it on how to do a cover slip on a slide with a skin tissue of some sort, and gram stain blue staining process. Okay, I got to go over that. The group up top never took the vocabulary test. I need to give it to them. I could have 17 pullouts or 2 pullouts, but the idea that there's an anchor there in the middle, well, these are anchor activity suggestions. For example, an anchor activity should have not one, but multiple steps, because it'll get old real fast. A half an hour, 45 minutes of just doing that. You want to have multiple things, and that kind of leads to the second one. Always have a product that must come from it. It increases the urgency of the moment. I have to stay focused, and accountability. So it might be, here's a labor union, maybe fighting for this particular set of principles. Design a flag that might be waved at a labor union rally, and describe the symbols in that and where it comes from historically. That's a good half an hour for a lot of kids. So I can give you more advice on that, but you see different advice going down there, anchor activities all the way down. And then one of the things that we do is we want to build that autonomy. So usually you create at the beginning of the year a poster of 10 things. Now, guys, I've given you 7 here, so no whining. You could invent the other 3 with brainstorming with your class, but at least 10 things you would do before you would ever go to a teacher. When I'm doing a mini lesson pullout, you honor that. You really do. So for example, look at the 3rd one up from the bottom. When I taught primary grades, it had a baseball cap, and on the visor it said, "Ask me." I'm the ask me kid, I know. And I'd always say, this is somebody who understands it really well. I made sure if you get stuck, go see Lakeisha or Iqbal or Miguel, whoever it is. But for older students, wearing a baseball cap, they're thinking lice, even cooties from yesteryear. They're thinking, I'm not going to wear that. So what I do is I get the triangular tent cards and put it on their desk, and they're graduate assistants or teacher assistants, like in college. I explain what that is. Now, I always have 2 of these people in case one is being used by somebody else or one didn't quite understand it. And I have vetted them ahead of time. But guys, there are some students who are always perpetually behind. You might have them in mind right now. And I literally go to their houses or ask them to come over early on remote learning. I work with them ahead of time online, and I teach them something just by themselves. So they really know it. And then on purpose, when I really teach the larger class, I pretend to be doing teacherly things. You need to go talk to Philip. I've taught, he's the expert of the day, the graduate assistant. I'll be working over here on something. And they're like, Mr. Wormeli, did you say Philip? Yes, Philip. So I kind of go to Philip and go, Philip, what do I do? And Philip goes, yeah, it's a negative exponent. It's 1/8, not 8/1. And I'm like, Philip, who knew? You knew. And he gets to feel what it's like, not to be the drain, not to be the problem, the one who is always behind, but to be the knowledgeable one at least once during the year. We are not above manipulation and tyranny at any point. We can make this stuff happen. So those are some ideas there for how to get them autonomous. This slide has all this print in case you want to enlarge it and look at it, but the graphic afterwards is really what it's saying, is what it's creating. So this is an analogy of a football, the American football version of that, not the European one, of course. But in American football, it's narrow, wide, and then narrow again on the other side. So narrow, wide, narrow. So I might do 10 to 15 minutes, global instruction, no differentiation, everybody's together. Then for 15, 20 minutes, I would have them process via their own routes. This might be some of the asynchronous activities. They're reading this text, but it's at different readability levels, but they're still rallying around the same literary devices, or analyzing how an author creates authenticity, for example. Whatever it is, they're processing via their level, their passion, their strength. And then we come back together for 10 to 15 minutes, and everybody can contribute in the summarization experience because they are able to process it via their own strength. So this could be a 45-minute sequence right here. These are the tips you get when you read articles and books on descriptive feedback, on differentiated instruction. So these 2 slides, I'm toggling back and forth between them. I love these 2 slides. These are all the ways I've ever found to raise complexity or lower complexity. You add these elements in, you take them out. So these are really weird. So I decided to give you curriculum examples of these being portrayed. So how does this idea apply to the expansion of railroads? Whoa, that was the second one, extending a concept to another area. How about this? Retell Goldilocks and the Three Bears as a cautionary tale against McCarthyism, or re-envision the country's involvement in war in terms of insect behavior. Or the second one from the bottom, the middle one, how is grammar and punctuation like music as analogies? These are cool, lots more from where this came from if you want to explore this. A reminder that Carol Ann Tomlinson has a thing called the equalizer. It's really cool. If you type in Carol Ann Tomlinson equalizer, it'll come right up. Lots of websites use it, books. And what it is she's identified these general areas. So concrete to abstract, single facet to multiple facet. Almost every assignment and learning experience, every assessment too, is somewhere along each of these continua or continuum. I don't know what the plural is there. And what you might do is two ways. You look at your students and you plot where they might be on each one of these. And you kind of create a profile, right? And then you look at your assignments, the thing you're about to do, and go, does this match that profile roughly? Or you design your assignment, your project, and you plot it on each of these continuum, all the way down. And then you look at, does that really respond to the needs of my students? This is supposed to be a launching pad, a catalyst for your own adjustment of assignments to respond to what you find out about students. There are books and websites where they say, here's the profile on the equalizer, so this is what I decided to do. A lot of those from Carol Ann Tomlinson and some of her co-writers, but if you type it in, you'll get lots of examples. One more tool to use. And then I'm begging you to reconsider your verbs. Argue against pronouns, argue against gravity. Boy, that's taking it way up there, man. Interview a right angle about a day in its life. Changing the verb changes the complexity of what we're asking kids to do. You might remember this from the last time. Many, many times when we're differentiating, we really need to respond to different levels of development of executive function. A reminder of executive function, you see these skills listed here. So if the kid is having a problem with responsibility, starting assignment and finishing it, having supplies ready on the date determined, sustaining focus and attention, these are all a part of executive function, which is right behind the forehead in the prefrontal cortex and comes online at 18 to 25. We teach the ages younger than that. So read an article or one book, if at all possible. You see Smart But Scattered, Late, Lost, Unprepared, and you will get so many wonderful ideas where kids are struggling with this one particular thing and how to cultivate that and develop that within the child. I'm going to recommend it as a first order business over the summer, if at all possible. Special ed tends to know about it a lot. Regular education teachers tend not to know about it as much. We can change that. Now, one of the biggest things, and I'm not going to belabor this because we talked about last time, is reiteration. We need multiple attempts and the critique, the feedback in between on which we can hook new learning, revise in light of that. This is going to be huge in a differentiated class. So if you're thinking, you know what, I'm here to teach so that they learn, not just play gotcha, then I will do whatever it takes. And if it takes 17 times or it takes 3 times, we're going to do it because the goal is they learn it, not that they jump through hoops. Very different dynamic. Now, I want to get this across. This is a very common graphic. Many of us have seen this before, but it's a haunting picture. And as you're looking at the titles, as we scroll through this, be thinking, one of the ways that you become really good at differentiation is you become a mini expert in the unique nature of subgroups within your class. Let's silently take a look. Remember, it's what they learn, not how we taught it or what we taught, or whether they were compliant. That is our clearest testimony as educators, and certainly for a grade, as we mentioned last time. So toward that end, Let's get up to speed on the variety of students in front of us. If you want to take this to differentiation 2.0, let's get up to speed on cognitive science, how the brain learns, observes, gains insight, makes connections. These are just some of the cool ideas that are listed there. And then let's get up to speed on what is appropriate in terms of assessment and grading if we were equitable and we were responsive to what we know about children. And then here are 2 slides in a row on how you build that repertoire. So let's get up to speed on that professional dedication to cultivating one's capacity, building the capacity to actually differentiate rather than saying just differentiate and never having the tools to do it. These are some of the wonderful ways you can do it. I'd be glad to support you. Here's slide 2, including inviting people to criticize our lesson plans, critique them in light of differentiation principles, making sure we're living up to it. It's so subjective to design lessons. I would pay money for people to look at my lessons if I had extra money like that, because I'm overwhelmed. The number of times people look at my lessons, and I coach teachers on lesson design who look at them and go, missed opportunity. You could have done this. And I'm like, oh man, you're right. And I will tell you right here, and you might have to move your video, whatever it is, but this is TTAC here in Virginia. You're welcome to look at it. You also have Differentiation Central and Richard Cash's wonderful website. TTAC, though, many provinces and states I found have something like this. What it is, oh, by the way, come visit Virginia. This is a picture of Shenandoah National Park near my house. What it is you've got a child who struggles with something. It has a website where it says, here's a multitude of things you could do in response to that. These are just examples for you to consider, 2 slides worth. And then these are the best books, the most practical books on doing differentiate instruction. And the one in the upper right-hand corner, the colorful letter differentiation, that's here. That's what this session has been based on. So if you want it fleshed out and far more coherent, you might want to take a look at that book if you like it. It says grades 6 to 12, but really it's very appropriate grades 2 to 12. These are books for gifted if you've got advanced kids. These are just designing differentiation and 21st century skills, how you differentiate that. Again, you've got the book on the right, which is on assessment and grading, but the one on the left, it gives so many ideas on how to process in differentiated ways. And then these are books just on differentiation in general that really serve us well. So they're all there. You can pause the video at any point and just take a closer look at any of these, or email me if you don't have the slides. If you're into social justice, this is the grading one for equity. And this is how you get a hold of me. At this point, I need to clam up. Any quick questions we can offer there, Susan?
No, I don't see any at this point. So we've got 2 minutes left in our session. Christine, would you like to screen share our second last slide, please, so I can talk about Rick's upcoming session? Okay, so thank you so much to Rick Wormeli for sharing his expertise today about differentiated instruction. So if you haven't already signed up for day 3, he's going to be talking about practical descriptive feedback techniques and plagiarism. And we also have Rick coming in to participate in tomorrow's session with ADLC in the afternoon for strategies to maintain academic integrity for supporting learning at home. So ADLC, Alberta distance learning teachers, of course, are online teachers full-time. And so they're going to share their tips and tricks about how they do safeguard against plagiarism, and we have teachers from different divisional levels that are sharing those techniques. So that is tomorrow from 1 to 3, and you can register at www.erlc.ca. And Christine, the last slide. And so thank you very much on behalf of ERLC and the Alberta Learning Consortium. And again, if you have any questions for Rick, Rick's email is displayed, rick@rickwormeli.onmicrosoft.com. Thank you for joining us today. And once again, it's a pleasure, Rick. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I look forward to next week.
Great, thanks.